Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Campion, and this is The Miracle of Healing. I'm so thrilled today to have a really inspirational person and a good friend of mine on the show today. We're going to talk about something that's really, I think, important and not talked about enough, and that is what is the tipping point to recovery? Now, I know from Kate that recovery from addiction is always possible, even when we think it's not, but especially when the families get empowered to know the truth about what's really going on with addiction. And Kate Duffy's a family addiction expert. She's an interventionist and a coach, and she really helps families that are dealing with people who are in the throes of addiction. And she helps them figure out what's going on and help them strategize how to deal with that. And she's been an inspiring, person to me and many other people as she's done hundreds of interventions. And she's really created a very unique and proven family recovery model where families are empowered to rise above the chaos of addiction. And when families heal, their loved ones can too. So welcome, Kate.
Thank you, Lisa.
So let's talk about, do you mind sharing a little bit of your story? Can we start with that?
Oh, we absolutely can. So I always like to say, I don't mind sharing. I'm Kate Duffy. I'm an alcoholic. I'm not anonymous. Had I been a lot younger, I probably would have had maybe some pride in the way, but I got sober when I was 50. I am now 60. And to be quite honest, I had no idea what was happening to me. I went from what I thought was a regular person to someone that was doing things and making decisions that absolutely 100% didn't align with who I was or my values, like driving drunk with kids in the car. And, there's no shortage of trauma that I induced myself, or that this illness induced on me, that I induced on me, and that I induced on those that I love. So 10 years sober. And I also want to add, clean from codependency about 6 years, free from sugar about 4 years. Just bring it on. There's constantly new addictions, Lisa. Today I posted that we're all addicted to criticism and blame. There's just so many things that we're addicted to. And for me, drugs and alcohol was by far the worst. I wanted to die. 100% wanted to die. But I now see it as like slow suicide.
Well, thank you for sharing so honestly your story. And I know, you and I have talked about this before, where addiction is really, I don't know if we can call it a pandemic, an endemic, because I think we're stuck with it. It's so common, and everyone who's listening here knows someone who's dealing with addiction, whether you know you do or don't, because often it's hiding in plain sight. We all know people who are struggling with addiction, and families who have loved ones that are struggling with addiction. And, there's so much shame around it. We don't sort of talk about it or know how to get help about it. It's kind of like the elephant in the room that we don't want to talk about a lot of times. And one thing that I love so much about your work is really tackling it head on, because if we can't talk about it, how can we ever get help or change it?
Yeah. And, you speak about pandemic, epidemic. A doctor I went to visit recently, just this past week, told me that in the last year, like a vast number of his patients are reporting to him, I'm drinking a lot more, 4 to 6 drinks a day. And so, fatalities are up on the road. We're just more stressed, and drunk driving is part of that, but it's also just stress. So people are reaching for food or alcohol at far faster rates, I think, than even before. And it was bad enough a couple of years ago. Right. It's a big deal.
It's a big deal. And, there's the opioid crisis and the problems with fentanyl that are going on now, which I think is the other big epidemic, and meth, like all these like heavily addictive drugs that people fall into that, are also on the news pretty much every day, right? That the impact that that's having on our society right now.
Yeah. I heard a CEO of a treatment center speaking recently, and he said some kids aren't even getting the chance to get addicted, and they're passing just because of what's on the streets.
Yeah, so scary.
It is really scary. And I'm really grateful that you are willing to talk about it, because that's what we're all about. So.
Right. And I know that your tipping point recovery method is really pretty different from the step method, and the step methods, the AA and Al-Anon, they're very effective. A lot of people start there, and yours is also different because the way that you are working with addicts is really working with the families of addicts directly. And I think Al-Anon does some of that, but tell us a little bit about what you discovered about what was missing in those steps and what how tipping point addresses that.
Yeah, that's great. I'm really glad you asked it in the way you did. AA saved my life, and Al-Anon in many ways as the codependent, saved my life at a different layer. And the way drugs and alcohol show up for a person in the majority of the cases, not all, there's such, the symptoms are really lying, denying, compartmentalizing, minimizing. So if you have an illness that you don't want to talk about because the nature of the illness causes you to minimize it, then you're not going to include your family in. And we don't treat it that way. When someone presents to a hospital, so I was working on call doing overdose intervention and helping people with alcohol in the emergency room. And the way we typically greet people in the emergency room is, do you want help? And the way you greet a person struggling with drug or alcohol addiction, most of them if you say that, most will say no, because the disease minimizes. And so it baffled me when I first got sober. I thought, why didn't anybody confront that? And I know confronting it sometimes doesn't get us the result we want, right? So what we learned by mistake was how to confront it in a way that did get people to talk. And so to tie that example back in the emergency room, they were literally engaging 1% of the people. So 99% of the people were saying no when they were asked if they wanted help. When we asked them to change the question to, will you speak to a recovering addict? 100% of them said yes. So that was the first moment that I had this awareness that it's weird the way we're treating this. And it doesn't mean we need to go into the person and assume they're lying and confront in a really, pushy way, but to relate and AA works because it's peer-to-peer. So let's use that peer-to-peer model in emergency rooms. And in our state, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, they are doing that more. Right. And in Connecticut, we need that all over the country, that peer-to-peer. The other reason I'm doing this is my 3 teenagers tried to confront me, tried to speak to me about their concerns with my drinking. And because I showed up as an alcoholic, as we say in AA, a good alcoholic that I denied the whole thing. And I left my kids completely in the dark. I was separated, so there wasn't another adult. And they believed me. They sort of believed me, but they were really scared. So what I did is I confused them. I think it's such a disservice to the world that what I think we're doing is allowing the addiction to just ravage the whole family, right? Because when you love someone that has addictions, brutal.
Yeah.
Because of the lying, the denying, the mean. I mean, I was so mean to people I love. And so I'm not suggesting that we ignore that. I'm just suggesting we deal with that over here and then invite the alcoholic in a different way.
Right. So your programs, and you have sort of short-term programs, long-term programs. You work with people individually. You help families, stage interventions for people who are in the really in the deep throes of active addiction. Focus is not so much on the addict, which you've said is hard to do because they have a stake in not giving up their addiction due to the nature of addiction. Right. So that's sort of like you can just kind of keep hitting your head against the wall of that over and over again, where you've shifted the focus of your work a little more to the working with the families of the addict and changing the family environment and maybe dealing with the underlying traumas that drive people to addiction in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, what we're doing is we are creating an optimal environment in the home for the disease not to thrive. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason I'm working with families is working directly with the individual doesn't work the majority of the time. And so when I worked in that system, I worked in the medical system and treatment system for a few years. And I thought, people are going home doing the same thing over and over. Every day we try the same thing over and over and it's not working. The numbers are just out of control. And I'm a solution person. So I just kept thinking, there's got to be a better way. And because of these experiences and talking with families, I realized we're just trapping the family, and it's only hurting the alcoholic who doesn't want to be this way. None of the people that are doing the things they're doing want to be that way. So yeah, we go in, and what I tell families is it doesn't matter if your whole family's on board. One person can start the conversation. And you described the different levels of our programs. The one thing we do is we educate. It's really a lot of education because, Lisa, be honest, who can understand why people do the same thing over and over? You get in a car accident, you get a DUI, you total your car, you lose your job, you lose people. You keep doing it again.
Right.
So it takes, I believe, the recovering people can help we call them normal people, which we laugh, right? Because there's no such thing. But that's what we're doing, is we're teaching sort of behind the curtain at what we wish we told our families when we were struggling. We wish our families knew when we were struggling, but the addiction wouldn't let us tell them.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what do we do if we think we have somebody in our lives, or we in fact ourselves have an addiction? Well, what's the starting point? How do we begin the process?
Yeah. So the starting point for the person struggling is to find someone else who's been there before you. And that's in the form of a meeting, in the form of contacting a phone number. There's always this 24/7 phone numbers. It's talking to someone who's been there before. And it's literally just admitting it out loud. Even if you change your mind a few hours later, that's a beginning. That's how it starts. It's getting honest, and it's finding someone who's been there to talk to. Because it's not we don't go from A to Z. We take baby steps. So the first step is just telling someone that you trust. For families, I have so many strategies. The main reason we're working with families is because your alcoholic will call me for help, but then they won't call me back because they'll start drinking or they'll be using drugs. So what I say to families is, let me help you shift a whole bunch of things in the way you're responding, not responding, what you say, how you respond, how you act, what you do with how you feel about it. That's what we help families change. Very concrete, Lisa. It's not fluff. It's super concrete, really practical. So if I could think of the first thing, I want to just think of a scenario so I can give some really practical. First thing I would do is stop trying to rationalize with the person that's using. Because that's where you're going to go crazy, because you can't rationalize with addiction, right? So all your knowledge in the world, if somebody's active in addiction, it's like trying to talk to the wall or trying to stop a tornado, right? We would never try to stop weather.
Right.
Or trying to rationalize with your mom who's got Alzheimer's. Why are you forgetting? We don't do that because we are learning it's a brain disease and we understand how the brain shows up. Same thing's going on with addiction. That's really the first thing. Now, how do you stop communicating with them? Because how do you do that? You learn why they're doing what they're doing. It makes you want to stop. When you realize that you're kind of in this spiral yourself, you want to stop, especially if you know there's somewhere to go to talk to someone, get some advice. But that's the first thing, is just stop.
Kate, I want to talk about your Stop the Chaos program, but before we do that, let's take a quick break.
Okay.